Okay, so this whole part literally sounds like a movie. This is just mind-blowing. At times, appearing in my car, so that's Ka, etheric twin, I returned to the cave and hovered near my physical or cut body to support its regeneration. At such times, I was quite visible to those who were guarding the sepulchre, and we communed together and gave my physical body the appropriate healing energy that it might require. Most of the time, my consciousness was elsewhere, even visiting other planets. I especially enjoyed going to the Hathor healing temples on Venus. Wow. And continuing my studies at the higher spiritual universities located in the Pleiades and Sirius B. There I was prepared for my role to be the mother of Mary and the grandmother of him who would publicly demonstrate the way of the teacher of righteousness, the way of a Christ. What a life. Yep, just gonna leave my body to regenerate for a while in a sarcophagus, and I'm just gonna go to Venus for a while, or the Pleiades or Sirius B, and do some studying. Why not? Hi, and welcome to Empowered Spirit Healing. My name is Paula, and today we are continuing on with episode 4 of our spiritual book, which is Anna, the grandmother of Jesus. In our last episode, episode 3, we covered how Anna had traveled back to Mount Carmel after being in Egypt for quite a long time, several hundred years, and how she had done lots of initiations. She became a high priestess of Isis and Hathor and Sekhmet. And then she went back to Mount Carmel. She became very, very close with her granddaughter, his Miriam. And his Miriam basically had intuition that she would need to pass on, and she was going to come back as Mother Mary. So she was going to come back as Anna's daughter, Mary. So it's pretty mind-blowing. So basically, she went up to the top of Mount Carmel and ascended and left the earth plane a lot like Elijah in the Bible, I believe. I really hope you're enjoying this book as much as me. I am loving it. And if you are, please subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please like, comment below. When I hear from people who tell me how much they enjoy the books that I'm reading or the meditations or soundscapes I'm creating, it just means the world to me, because I know that I'm helping people in some small way, and that's the goal of my channel, really. It's just to help people in some small way. So we're going to continue on with chapter 8. Anna reveals the resurrection mysteries. During the 150 years that bridged my return to Mount Carmel from Egypt and the beginning of the phase of my life in which I began to give birth to my numerous children, there were many changes made upon the political face of Palestine. After Alexander the Great died of a fever in 323 BC at the age of 33, wow, interesting, lots of threes going on there. Interesting that he died at the age of 33, which is the same age that Christ reportedly died on the cross. His Macedonian generals divided up the spoils among themselves. Although they had been skilled at war, they were in most cases inexcusably inept when it came to political governance and social reform. It was only a matter of time before their descendants began to do battle with one another for control of the lands that they had inherited. Shortly after my return to Mount Carmel, the storm clouds began to gather again. When Hellenistic culture was enforced upon the Jews, the resulting political tension gradually increased until finally, in 167 BC, it culminated in the Maccabean revolt. Eventually, an independent Jewish state was established in 142 BC, governed by the Hasmonean dynasty. One of the descendants of this dynasty was King Herod, who is known in your New Testament account. Much of the impetus that later created the Jewish zealots and spurred the conservative fundamentalism of the Qumran Essenes derived from this divisive revolt, which was further amplified by the presence of conquering Roman soldiers and governors. It was within this context of political ferment that I settled into my life's daily routine in Carmel. This was our situation in those troubled days that I began to go out from Mount Carmel to tread the fertile hillsides of Palestine with others of our Essene order. First, we went to the nearby villages in Galilee and then to the towns and cities of Samaria and Judea in the south. I often journeyed to the Capernaum of the Sea of Galilee and Qumran on the Salt Sea, or the Dead Sea as it has come to be known. Along the coast of the Great Sea, which you now call the Mediterranean, I made my way by boat from Ptolemais to Tyre in the north and to Joppa in the south. The plain of Sharon, which extends along the coast all the way from Mount Carmel to Joppa, was well known to me. I also trekked northwards, following the River Jordan beyond the Sea of Galilee to its outsource, and upwards I climbed to an ancient sanctuary near the top of Mount Hermon. I made a pilgrimage to an even more ancient sanctuary, high on the slopes of Mount Ararat. No further during those years, by land or boat, did I travel in my body of flesh, as do most pilgrims. However, I teleported and bilocated to any number of places across many timelines. Wow, that's pretty cool. As a high priestess of the Order of Essenes, I now had a sacred responsibility to reach out to our people. Yet we who were from Mount Carmel were neither zealous nor fanatical in our evangelism, as some might think. Rather, our work was quiet. To those with ears to hear, we brought the way of the teacher of righteousness, the wisdom teachings that reveal the right use of energy. However, only those who were receptive to our message did we invite to join our order. So they were basically spreading the message of Jesus before Jesus was even born. So that's really quite interesting, because we only really hear about Jesus's teachings after, like the work that he did while he was alive and then supposedly died. But it wasn't just his work. This work goes much further back. And there were people that were trying to spread this message a long time before he even came to the earth plane. So really interesting. My reasons for making my pilgrimages were twofold. The first I have already explained. However, the second reason is much more hidden. I will now introduce you to some of the little understood resurrection processes I used as a teacher of righteousness to maintain my physical body from generation to generation. In addition to deep daily meditation, in which I disengaged from the tribal consciousness belief in suffering, disease, and unconscious dying, I also took myself for extended periods into sequestered silence, away from any possible distraction. As you may recall, I said that I had mastered the rite of the sepulchre in Egypt. Therefore, it was possible for me to go into states of consciousness that the Hindus call samadhi or union in God, during which times my physical vital signs were indiscernible and in some cases non-existent. Yet my body remained sweet and vital. Because I chose to continue to abide on the earth plane in order to extend my days of service, I did not master the higher states of samadhi that would have caused me to become completely absorbed in God. Thus, in order to attain my purpose on the earth plane, there was times when it was required of me to enter the lesser states of samadhi, not only for a few weeks of rejuvenation and rest, but to remain in suspended states of animation for many years. Wow. So she basically went into this state of consciousness with God and stayed that way for years in order to keep her body young and healthy and vital. Wow. Indeed, there were periods in which my physical body abided in such states for a generation or more, so that when I resumed my walk upon the earth, ordinary society around me thought of me as one of them without raising questions or fear. Well, I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? Because it would be suspicious if somebody's just not aging. So if you were to just kind of disappear for quite a while and then come back, then people would just accept you. Those of our Essene fellowship who knew the way of the teacher of righteousness kept its practices strictly guarded, supported each other's bodies during our vacations, staged funerals, provided aliases, and offered understandable explanations for our rather mysterious comings and goings. I'm sure if you were to stop and imagine yourself chronologically older than everyone around you, you might begin to understand the rather delicate situation that a physical immortal experiences. I can imagine. I mean, just got to watch Twilight. It makes it rather complicated if you're a vampire and you're living for a really long time, especially in a small town. After all, how would you explain to someone who didn't understand physical immortality how you could live for hundreds of years? Although you might look like a youthful adult, would you openly admit that you were the ancestor of hundreds of descendants, most of whom had died, and some of whom are presently living and appear older than you? Yeah, that would be pretty weird. Often when I took myself out into the surrounding countryside to serve our Essene community and to visit my descendants in their various villages, I would go to the secret places that supported rest and regeneration. Wow, I wonder where they are. These places are known to the brother sisterhood of light and have been preserved through the rises of civilization. They are always protected from the uninitiated, the naive curiosity seeker, or plundering thieves. I wonder if they put some kind of like invisibility spell or something over it to deter people from finding it. There were 3 primary sanctuaries that supported my cellular regeneration. The one I most frequented was within a cave at Mount Carmel. The other 2 were in caves near Qumran and Mount Hermon. These 3 caves acted as a focus of triangulated energy that was held constant by the priests and priestesses who facilitated the cave's maintenance and served the adepts who came there. Within these caves were stone sepulchres carved to precise dimensions, inscribed with magical prescriptions and life-sustaining antidotes, and filled with a peculiar kind of living plasma that had the consistency of amniotic fluid. Whoa. I'm pretty sure that people are talking about plasma these days as a way to stay young. So they had some kind of living plasma 2,000 years ago. Wow. So that's pretty crazy. Anytime I desired to rest and regenerate, I always went through a period of purification and an extended fast, accompanied by deep meditation. If it was time for me to be away for a while, I was prepared for the full rite of the sepulchre. You might well ask, why would a soul as evolved as mine choose to undergo the rigors of the rite of the sepulchre and the potential dangers of lying in suspended animation? Man, it just makes me think of that movie Divergent, where they're like sitting on a chair and their brain is connected to some kind of simulation. And it's almost like that. It's like she's laying in a cave and her consciousness is who knows where, and her body's just laying there. It's pretty mind-blowing to think that. I mean, yeah, we can imagine that today with all the kind of technology that we have, but imagining that they were doing that so long ago, it's really crazy. So she says, my reasons for doing so were multifold. First of all, I was deeply guided from within to remember how to preserve and resurrect a physical body for short and extended periods, which I later came to understand was a preparation for me to teach my grandson, whom you call Jesus, how to resurrect his body. Well, there you go. That makes sense, doesn't it? Because, for anybody that's kind of done a bit of a deep dive into it, it's kind of pretty obvious that he didn't actually die on the cross. Secondly, I personally preferred to maintain my physical body as long as it served my soul's purposes, instead of passing through the rigors of the birth canal and infancy or walking into a body again. Interesting. Not sure which route I would prefer. My desire was to master the laws of the physical plane and spiritual immortality, remain in service to humanity as one who appeared quite ordinary, and then when my soul had accomplished all that I had come to do, eventually take my ascension. So you know how when you're at dinner and people say, who would you like to have dinner with, dead or alive? I'm telling you, I want to have dinner with Jesus's grandmother. She just sounds like the most incredible, fascinating person, and her wealth of knowledge, I could just talk to her for hours on end and hopefully learn some rejuvenation secrets. My few experiences with ascended beings informed me that their visitations into the density of the earth plane were infrequent, and that when they came to assist humanity, it was for short periods of time. At some point, popping in and out as an ascended master would also be my choice. But for now, I was content to linger close to humanity and Mother Earth as long as I was guided to do so. After going through the appropriate rite of the sepulchre purification rituals, I then proceeded into a deeply altered brain state. When I reached the desired state in which my body was asleep and my consciousness was identified completely with my higher light bodies, my anointed physical body, or Khat, spelt Khat, was wrapped in swaddling clothes. These are similar to the cotton and linen shrouds that are used in mummification. The cloths were saturated with essential oils known to preserve and regenerate tissue. If I were to go through a relatively brief regenerative process, my swaddled body was placed on top of the sepulchre or inside without the lid put in place. In such circumstances, my face was exposed, except for a napkin that fluttered with my returning breath, signaling to the attending priest or priestess that my body was becoming animated. If I were to be away for several months or for an extended period of many years, my entire body was carefully wrapped and placed inside the sepulchre, where a nurturing amniotic-like fluid or molecularly, I can't pronounce that, structured water had been poured, facilitating a state of suspension or anti-gravity. God, it's like the Matrix. Attending priests and priestesses then hermetically sealed the lid of the sarcophagus once it was levitated into its precise position. So it was that all the elements of the rite of the sepulchre acted in complete synergy. Okay, so this whole part literally sounds like a movie. This is just mind-blowing. At times, appearing in my car, so that's Ka, etheric twin, I returned to the cave and hovered near my physical or cut body to support its regeneration. At such times, I was quite visible to those who were guarding the sepulchre, and we communed together and gave my physical body the appropriate healing energy that it might require. Most of the time, my consciousness was elsewhere, even visiting other planets. I especially enjoyed going to the Hathor healing temples on Venus. Wow. And continuing my studies at the higher spiritual universities located in the Pleiades and Sirius B. There I was prepared for my role to be the mother of Mary and the grandmother of him who would publicly demonstrate the way of the teacher of righteousness, the way of a Christ. What a life. Yep, just going to leave my body to regenerate for a while in a sarcophagus, and I'm just going to go to Venus for a while, or the Pleiades or Sirius B, and do some studying. Why not? When it was time for my return to the earth plane, I made my presence known to an overseeing priest or priestess who supported me in my full re-entry into my physical body. The silver cord or secret channel that always remained connected to all my bodies was charged with life force, and then I spiraled back in much the same way as I had spiraled out. Very interesting. The lid was unsealed, and I was lifted out of the sepulchre, unwrapped, bathed, and given liquids to drink. It usually took a number of days, sometimes weeks, for me to fully regain my physical faculties. All of these experiences assisted my soul to evolve and to prepare for my coming work on the earth plane. Okay, so what I really want to know is, are there people out there doing this right now? Because I reckon there are. You may think I'm fabricating a fairy tale or at best science fiction. Yet I assure you, my friend, that as the approaching golden age reveals this ancient science of physical and spiritual immortality, you may awaken to the super consciousness and remember what we called the way of the teacher of righteousness, the Grail codes of light. These presently lie dormant within the sepulchre you call your body, and the larger sepulchre that is the unconscious material world, and they are rising in resurrected consciousness. Although you may think that my life was more significant than yours and my level of self-mastery greater than you can attain, I am compelled to emphasize once again that you too are remembering your soul's past and future lifetimes of mastery, which are now culminating in your everyday life. You may make different choices to serve others through your self-mastery than I demonstrated. Yet, regardless of how you express your full divinity, I am here to catalyze you into resurrecting the indwelling Christ, your true self, who always knows the way. Thus you can see that I knew well the initiatory process of crucifying my separate identity as a physical body and ego, laying that small self to rest and resurrecting my vaster consciousness that is always in union with my Creator. The crucifixion initiation, as it has been taught by those who attempt to control the masses through fear, would have you to believe that atonement, to be at one with God, is accomplished through suffering and blood sacrifice. I reassure you that suffering is the consequence only when the separate self resists being at one with God. When God, Goddess, is realized as the source of love, the only sacrifice required is the willingness to offer up one's arrogant sense of separation so that love can claim its own. Over a long span of years, I continued to participate in the ritual of the rite of the sepulchre. As time passed and my mastery increased, I had the opportunity of initiating others into the mysteries of the crucifixion and resurrection initiations. Within the continuing passage of time, I gradually arrived at a clearer understanding of the nature of my assignment to prepare the way for him who was soon to come. I also realized how it was that all my experiences would serve a greater part. But first, a cast of characters who had agreed to play our supportive roles had to be provided with opportunities to enter upon the stage. And so it was that I passed across the threshold of celibacy in order to experience a more expanded, compassionate love that can come through conscious, sacred relationship and childbearing. I feel like that's probably one of the most mind-blowing chapters in the entire book in terms of the process of rejuvenation. It really, like she said, it literally is like watching a science fiction movie. It's just wow. Like I said, it's like watching The Matrix or Divergent or something, and you can imagine it in our time, but how they did this 2000 years ago, I just sometimes wonder if life really was how they explained life was, because there seems to be some pretty cool technologies back in the day. And I mean, even looking at the whole mud flood Tartaria theory, I love that theory. I think that is so incredible. And there are so many incredible buildings that they just can't replicate today. And apparently a lot of them were built with sound and things like that. And they had electricity. And I mean, there were buildings that didn't even have toilets. And it's like, what kind of people were living in buildings that didn't have toilets? Were they like really high people, like light people with light bodies? I don't know. It's pretty mind-blowing. If you want to learn more about Tartaria, I highly recommend you watching Mind Unveiled, because they do some pretty incredible videos about all of that kind of stuff. But anyways, we're going to continue with chapter 9. Matthias and Joseph of Arimathea. Now, I will remind you that there were wise ones who travelled a far wider range than I did during those years when I awaited my calling to bring forth the children who would be the Radiant One's support team. These were of a very ancient fellowship called the Order of the Magi. Some came from the Fertile Crescent and the Far East, while others came from Britain, Egypt, and Greece. For centuries, they had come to Mount Carmel to partake of our library and to exchange with us the most ancient wisdom that was preserved within their respective traditions. To be an Essene, as most of us at Mount Carmel chose to practice our understanding, was truly to be one who was receptive to a full spectrum of light. You could say that we were cross-pollinated by the many wisdom teachings that were disseminated by the wise ones who came and went like the wind. Ours was more of a way of life than what you would call a religion. Thus, we were as knowledgeable about Gautama Buddha and Zarathustra in more recent times as we were about Akhenaten and Moses in olden times, and Krishna, Isis, and Osiris in ancient times. Our eclectic and economical tradition allowed us to honor all perspectives, thereby enabling us to appreciate all the various names that the one god goddess had acquired in many different cultures and languages. Our teachings were transmitted primarily by oral rendition and by our living example. However, we also kept written records. Some of us were gifted scribes, and many of us knew a multitude of tongues. Yet, all in all, we were primarily of Hebrew descent, and our communal language was Aramaic. In all the ways that I have shared with you, my friend, I engaged myself for over 400 years. Now the time has come in the telling of my story in which I desire you to know me as a woman with human emotions, much like those you experience when it comes to intimate relationships. Well, it's good to know she was human too. Indeed, as I come to embrace life more fully, and prepared myself to bring forth his Miriam again as my daughter, I drew to me a mate, a divine mirror. Thus I came to know myself in ways not known during my previous long years. So I'm pretty sure what she's saying here is that she was celibate for 400 years, which is crazy. Because I think so far she's only had her first daughter, Ariana, which she didn't actually have. Like, she didn't do the act that you do to have her, because that was Hannah, who had slept with her beloved Thomas, and he unfortunately was taken away, and Hannah's soul left when Anna's soul walked in, when she was giving birth to Ariana. So that's a really long time. And his Miriam was Ariana's daughter, so she was Anna's granddaughter. So, yeah, and I believe she ends up having quite a few children. So I was just checking the back of the book because Claire Hartsong provides a little timeline, but I don't want to give away the details because I don't want to ruin the book. But basically, she has about 17 children. It's mind-blowing. I can't imagine having 17 children. I mean, over a long period of time, but still crazy. Okay, so let's continue on. As the days passed, I began to feel a flow of energy that I had not experienced for quite some time. A desire for joining with another grew stronger and stronger. I knew this was my internal guidance, preparing me to take the necessary action to fulfill my part in bringing forth the host of characters who would co-create and enact the Christ resurrection drama, as it was secretly taught and portrayed in the mystery schools. As I felt irresistibly pulled to the canopy of marriage, I made myself known as one eligible for the nuptial rites. There were several brothers among our Carmel community who felt drawn to me. One of these was Matthias. I'm not sure if it's Matthias or Matthias, so I apologize if I'm pronouncing it wrong. But from the spelling of it, I'm going to go with Matthias, so I do apologize if that irritates you. It's hard. When we're all from different countries, it's hard to get pronunciation correct all the time. He was the son of Matthias, a Levite high priest, and the grandson of Matthias the elder, who had come to the port of Ptolemais when I returned to Mount Carmel from Egypt in 207 BC. Another was Timothy, who kept the library. Matthias, in contrast to Timothy, was much younger in years and had not accomplished full mastery of all the initiations available at Carmel. I understood that either of these high initiates would be appropriate. My heart was drawn to Matthias. His love of nature and his ability to grow the most beauteous flowers and the most nurturing of produce was a delight to my soul. This, together with his genuine interest in the welfare of our community and his devotion to God, made him my favorite candidate. And I confess, I also honored the Hannah aspect of my human nature that was attracted to Matthias because his soul had previously incarnated as Thomas. So that's interesting. You recall that Thomas was Hannah's betrothed sweetheart who had been captured and taken away to Babylon before I walked into Hannah's body. For some deep place within my heart, a desire arose to somehow fulfill Hannah's unrequited love. Oh, well, that just makes absolute sense. We allowed a period of courtship which took us away from our usual occupations for short periods of time so that we might draw our soul essence together as well as our personas into a more intimate understanding of one another. We found compatibility and soon, within weeks, we were betrothed. Our betrothal took place in the fall of 58 BC after the harvest. A wondrous feast was prepared for us. The whole community of Carmel was in celebration. Much merrymaking lifted everyone's spirits, for they had known us as ascetic celibates for more time than most could remember. Much laughter and sincere well-wishing turned our feast day into a high day for Mount Carmel. Near the time of winter solstice, Matthias and I met beneath the canopy to exchange our rings and speak our vows. And on the eve of the year's longest night, I found myself with child. Now let me say further that this child's conception was overseen by the brother sisterhood of light. Into my womb was placed the very essence of this one's great soul, and the seed of Matthias also received high frequencies of light that would allow this child to grow in awareness beyond earthly limitation. I will always be grateful to my husband Matthias for so profoundly opening me to the wonders of nuptial bliss and light conception. I initiated Matthias, who had always been celibate, into the mysteries of Isis. Remembering my experiences in her temples, I guided Matthias in the ways of her sexual energy practices, in which the sexual energy is lifted upwards and the consciousness of the couple is resurrected into unity until they mutually attain states of bliss. It was into this high state of love that our child's soul was invited to enter the physical plane. And so did we consciously nurture him with our love through the months that he was in my womb. So that's quite an interesting way of bringing a baby into the world. Intimate relationship with a man and the bringing forth of children was a gift of such deepening awareness, I wondered why I had not allowed it before. Yet as I have contemplated the price of the deepening, I have realized that the opening came through the breaking of my heart, which I had avoided. The recalcitrant pain that had lodged in Hannah's wounded heart gave me every reason to postpone marriage. As an initiate, I transmuted much discordant emotion, yet I realized that I had nevertheless avoided the intimacy of love by justifying my prolonged celibacy as the path of least distraction, as I bent my personal will to that of spirits. How comforting it was to feel Matthias's gentle touch, and how awesome to celebrate life within my ancient yet youthful body. My daughter Oriana had passed on over 400 years ago. So at this point, her descendants were many. Most of these still lived in Egypt. Some were at Carmel, and others were in the surrounding communities of Galilee and Judea. Thus, when my time for delivery arrived, there was a great gathering of my descendants who came for the circumcision and naming of our first son. Just imagine that, just having hundreds of your descendants around you, and you're giving birth to a new child. Our son was born on the cusp of Virgo and Libra in the year 57 BC, according to your Gregorian calendar. Because he was one of the lineage of Joseph the Israelite, who had been sold into Egypt, we chose to name him after his forefather, as Joseph, our son, was known by all. This gifted child was reared with great love and devotion. At a most tender age, I took him to my knee and spoke to him of the lineage of our people Israel, or Isis Ra Elohim, as I like to say. I recited wondrous stories of ancient Egypt and other places I had travelled. I told him as well how I had spent time in Britain and had been adopted into a royal Celtic family who initiated me as a Druid priestess. His mind was like a sponge, absorbing all that I could give him, and he still thirsted for more. It was a year and a half after Joseph's birth, while our love was still strong for each other, that Matthias and I conceived a girl. We called her Martha. She was steady and resolute, gifted with wisdom of the hearth and a talent for managing details. She, like Joseph, would play her part in our unfolding story. Now I will share more fully about Joseph, whose life would continue to play a key part in the divine plan. Because Joseph easily took to linguistics, we taught him our native Aramaic language between the ages of 1 and 2. Wow, that's very young. Then between the ages of 2 and 3, I introduced him to the Hebrew tongue and fiery letters. During the following years, some of the Celtic language that I remembered became the focus of our attention because of its basic affinity with Hebrew. At the age of 6, he was introduced to the Persian and Sanskrit languages. Greek came next, followed by Egyptian. Latin, the formal language of the Romans, was somewhat reluctantly introduced into Joseph's curriculum when he was 11. Wow, that's a lot of different languages. The reason for our procrastinating the introduction of the Roman language was because of the bitter taste that still lingered over Pompey's Roman legions invasion of Palestine in 63 BC. The political strife between the aristocratic Sadducees and the Orthodox Pharisees had caused Rome to intervene. Jerusalem had been besieged and nearly 12,000 Jews had been slaughtered. Wow. By the end of 63 BC, all of Palestine had been incorporated into the Roman province of Syria and made a tributary of Rome. And to make the situation even bitterer to my taste, Rome had reintroduced crucifixion as punishment for any form of resistance in order to control the people. The emotional shock was profound when I happened to pass along the roads lined with crosses. Oh, that would just be so hideous. It seemed I could never close my heart to the suffering of the people. Would humanity ever learn the true meaning of the cross as a symbol of spirit joining matter? Well, people are still getting slaughtered today, so people are a bit slow. Matthias adored his son, yet he could not offer Joseph the same learning as I could. Consequently, there began to be a tension that arose between us with regard to Joseph's upbringing. A shadow of jealousy and self-criticism eroded Matthias's mind. Though Joseph loved to go with his father out into the fields and gardens and to walk hand in hand beneath the canopy of stars, his preference was to come with me and spend endless hours researching the ancient scrolls within the library. Thus, Matthias felt he had lost his son, and blaming me for the intense loss that he felt, he began to distance himself from me. Our bed became one filled with thorns instead of sweet-smelling roses. It's just so sad, isn't it? I feel like that happens a lot with relationships. As the months passed, Matthias drew a cold blanket of distance around himself. His many years of celibacy began to invite him back into a safer, more ascetic life, which protected him from feeling the emotional undercurrents that disturbed our family setting. My heart was sore and I felt remorse over the loss of my husband. Yet what could I do? Joseph was as he was, and Martha preferred to be with the women. Knowing that there is a divine purpose behind everything that occurs, I simply placed my trust in God and did my best to accept our situation. Several months after Joseph's 4th birthday, Matthias decided it would be best for all concerned if he moved to the Essene community at Qumran, which was located near the Salt Sea, about 80 miles to the southeast of Carmel. He approached this as an experiment, thinking that perhaps it would be only a temporary separation. However, I knew in my heart that our marriage was no more. Every few months, he made brief visits to Carmel to be with his children, but with me he felt a wounding and would not suffer himself to take me to his bed. So we took our case to a council of elders within our community and petitioned for an annulment of our vows, even though we did not find in one another any grievance of sin. It was an unusual request, yet the council granted our petition. And thus Matthias was free to express his exceptional gifts and extraordinary devotion within the gardens of Qumran. Well, that's really sad. But I think sometimes people come into our lives for a period of time and, they had a past life together and it was kind of shortened. And so at least they got to reconnect now. And then it's just time for them to move on again. And sometimes that's okay. Society doesn't always want us to believe that it's okay, but I totally believe that that is okay. It's just sad. Matthias enjoyed peace and contentment at Qumran until 37 BC, when he died of wounds suffered when he resisted Antony's Roman legions at the time they burned Qumran to the ground on the orders of King Herod the Edomite. Whew, that's a bit brutal. Following Matthias' departure from Mount Carmel, much of my attention was devoted to preparing my son for the role that I knew he was to play in the sacred drama, which even now was unfolding. So Joseph grew in stature. His capacity to learn far exceeded mine. He read and expounded the Mosaic law and the ancient records with anyone willing to engage with him. He especially loved the Magi who came from afar. His soul took flight while listening to their stories. At the age of 12, he was drawn to travel with these wise ones. It was not easy to let him go, yet I knew I must. Wow, I would find that hard to let my child go traveling at the age of 12. But yeah, I get it. Joseph was taken to Alexandria's great library to study, and then he took initiations into the Temple of the Nile. Next, he travelled through Parthia into India. He became well versed in the teachings of Zarathustra, Buddha, and Krishna. High into the Himalayas, he trekked without purse or scrip. For several years, he lived among the saints and masters. Some of these were physical immortals, such as the one called Babaji, who you know in your day as the revered father of the Kriya Yoga lineage. It was this beloved master who would also be a guru to the Son of Peace, although some stories say that Babaji was my grandson's disciple. Although it creates confusion for those who do not experience life in unity, in truth, it matters not who be guru or disciple when avatars, those who fully incarnate God consciousness from their youth, meet one another. They clearly reflect divinity in the mirror of oneness. Wow, that's really cool looking at it from that way, from that perspective. When Joseph returned to Carmel as a young man in his early 20s, he joined his acquired learning into that of our community, thus enriching us all. He was indeed a bright light. For the next few years, Joseph created home bases at Mount Carmel and Qumran. He translated the scrolls that he brought from Tibet, India, and Mesopotamia. During this time, he delivered as many as these records as possible to our Essenes community at Qumran. There he assisted the brethren to place strong energy barriers around the chambers in which the records were placed. We had come to feel great concerns for our library at Carmel, not knowing if or when the Roman legions might turn on us as they had upon Qumran in 37 BC, at the insane assistance of King Herod, who was incensed with the zealous Essenes at Qumran, were unalterably opposed to his rule. The conservative and rather militant Qumran community considered him not only unfit to govern because of his corrupt morality, but also because he was a descendant of Esau rather than Jacob. Well, that's fair enough. Bloody hell. Qumran, in spite of Herod's hatred, was now beginning to revive, albeit with an increased sense of caution among the two new sects among the Jewish people, the Zealots, who militantly opposed Herod's corrupt rule, and the Herodians, who actively supported it. Nevertheless, because of Mount Carmel's vulnerable position, Qumran seemed the better place to keep our precious records during this time of great uncertainty. Later in AD 31, after Qumran was the epicenter of a massive earthquake, Joseph conceived a plan for disseminating much of the Qumran and Carmel library to scattered Essene communities throughout the greater region of the Mediterranean and the British Isles, especially the larger isle called Albion. In 32 BC, a member of the Order of the Magi who was visiting Mount Carmel invited Joseph to come to Britain and enter into the initiations understood by the Council of Druids. Joseph had already met some of the Druid Magi while in Egypt. The Druids were a remnant that preserved the wisdom of ancient Atlantis and even more ancient Pangaea upon the British Isles. Even before Moses took the Hebrews out of Egypt, he sent representatives of all 12 tribes of Israel to establish colonies in Albion. Britain had also received some of the lost tribes of Israel during the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities. Through intermarriage, the Hebrews had emerged as the Celts during the many years they moved from the Middle East across Europe. As these migratory waves mingled, the Isle of Albion became known as Brith An, which is a Hebrew word that means the covenant land. So it was in the spring my son made the first of many trips to Britain, including journeys to what you call Ireland, Scotland, and the lands surrounding the northern shore of the Great Sea. In Britain, Joseph began the long initiatory process that eventually saw him as an arch-druid in his old age. Shortly after returning to Palestine from his pilgrimage to Britain, my son conceived the idea of owning and operating a fleet of freighting boats that primarily carried tin and lead ore. Also, having acquired partial ownership of 2 mines in Britain, he was now qualified to become a minister of mines in the Roman Empire. These credentials and resources provided him with a perfect cover for secretly transporting initiates and documents to Britain and to other Essene libraries located throughout the mountainous regions surrounding the Great Sea. That is so cool. I've kind of got a bit of a big soft spot for Joseph. He just seems like a really, really cool person. And how cool is that? So there literally could be all these texts from the Essene community spread all over Europe. That's so cool. I hope we find some of them in my time. So it was that Joseph developed his entrepreneurial and diplomatic skills. Over the next 10 years, with the aid of the Druid councils, he purchased and amassed a fleet of 12 boats. From that point on, it became his practice to make at least one trip to Britain every year. Now that his wealth and influence were becoming quite noticeable within the administrative structure of the Roman Empire in Jerusalem, he began to come to the attention of a wealthy Hasmonean prince. Arimathea was his name, and he was a member of the Jewish high judicial and legislative body called the Sanhedrin. He had inherited lands in Samaria from his Macedonian forebears. This large estate was located in southern Samaria on the caravan route between Galilee and Judea. Arimathea took a strong liking to my son, and he offered his eligible daughter, named Eunice Salome, in marriage. This arrangement would further their ambitious visions. Consequently, the marriage was arranged and celebrated in Jerusalem in the summer of 29 BC. Arimathea saw in Joseph a prodigy who could set aright the corruption that currently was sowing so much strife in Jerusalem. After marrying into the Arimathea family, my son began to study the law of meditation with his father-in-law, who took Joseph to the bosom, not only as his son-in-law, but also as his adopted son. Oh, I just think that's adorable. It was at this time that Joseph became an adjunctive representative from Galilee and Samaria to Jerusalem's Sanhedrin. Shortly thereafter, he moved to Jerusalem to make his home among the wealthy and learned. There he served for many years as an influential advisor. Thus, Joseph acted as a liaison between the many factions and the sects that were often in conflict. His mastery of languages and his knowledge of human nature made him respected by all. Though he could at times be cool and reserved, He was also available to those in need and to those of the brother sisterhood who knew him as an adept. His 3 residential properties in Jerusalem were strategically placed so that he had access to underground passages known by the brethren of Solomon's secret orders. Ooh. The descendants of these secret orders became known as the Cathars, Templars, and many of the ruling families of Europe. Joseph continued through his long life to practice the sciences of longevity for which the Essenes were publicly known, as well as the esoteric science of physical immortality, which very few understood or dared to practice. Thus it was that Joseph made himself available to many people. While he served the masses outwardly, he quietly and freely gave his unusual talents an example of devotion to the hidden orders of the brother sisterhood of light. Although I have got ahead of my story, I desire to lay a foundation for what is to come by telling you about the early years of my firstborn son, Joseph of Arimathea. And as we continue on in the story, you'll see what an important role he plays in the story of Jesus. Now I have to get going. I don't have time to read anymore, unfortunately, but in our next episode, in episode 5, we will continue on with chapter 10, which is called Anna's Light Conception Initiation. So I hope you are enjoying the story so far. Those 2 chapters were quite full on, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks for joining me. Bye.
Are you ready to take your healing journey to the next level? At Fusion Body Studio, we believe that spirituality starts in the body, and that exercise is the foundation of true spiritual growth and healing. We take the ancient spiritual teachings of the East and we fuse them with modern-day movement classes, so you can experience strength, balance, and transformation, all from the comfort of your own home. Right now, you can get access to a growing library of exercise classes, post-workout meditations, hypnotic recordings, and spiritual workshops. Everything you need to support your body, mind, and spirit. You can start your 7-day free trial today and enjoy 20% off your first 6 months with the code PAULA20 in capital letters. It's time to transform your body and empower your life with Fusion Body Studio, your online fitness boutique.